Welcome to Mental Minute, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that I find just endlessly fascinating. Evolution.
Oh, an excellent choice.
Yeah.
It's a
And
concept that, people think they understand.
right.
Boil it down to survival of the fittest. But evolution is much more nuanced than that. Really, it's about this intricate dance of life playing out, over generations and generations.
Okay, so let's start right there with that intricate dance.
Mhm.
Can you give us like a working definition? What is evolution?
Sure. At its core, evolution is change over time in a population. Specifically, it's the change in heritable traits, meaning those characteristics that are passed down from parents to offspring
Makes sense.
and over many generations. These traits are controlled by genes, which you can think of as like the blueprints for building an organism.
Okay, so we've got these blueprints, these genes being passed down. But what's actually driving the changes in those blueprints over time?
Well, there are three main forces at play. First up, you've got mutations. Think of these as like random changes in the DNA sequence, almost like a typo in that genetic code.
Ah, interesting.
And these mutations introduce new variations into a population's genes. Then there's sexual reproduction and all that shuffling of genes that happens, like a deck of cards being mixed up with each new generation, creates tons of new combinations.
Right.
And lastly, there's gene flow, where genes are exchanged between populations or even sometimes to different species. So you've got those three mutations, the shuffling during reproduction and gene flow.
Mutations, gene shuffling, and gene flow. These are the forces shaping the blueprints of life. Of those three, mutations, I think those seem particularly impactful. I mean, how can one single mutation lead to an entirely new trait?
Yeah, it's amazing. One way is through gene duplication. Picture a gene getting copied by accident. Now you have two of them. One copy keeps on doing its original job, while the other one, it's free to mutate and maybe even, develop a whole new function.
Oh, wow.
It's actually how the human eye evolved. We've got four genes that sense light, all came from a single ancestor gene, all through this process of duplication and then mutation.
That's incredible. So tiny changes at the genetic level can cascade into developing these complex structures like our eyes.
It is.
But how do these changes, whether through mutation or these other mechanisms, how do they become widespread in the population?
Well, that's where natural selection comes in. It's this process where traits that help an organism survive and reproduce, those traits become more common over generations. And it's not always about being the strongest or fastest, it's more about being the best suited to your specific environment.
So fitness, in this evolutionary sense, isn't about brute strength, but how well an organism's traits allow it to thrive and reproduce in its environment.
Precisely. A great example is the peppered moth. During the Industrial Revolution, before all the pollution, the light-colored moths, they were well camouflaged against trees.
Yeah.
But as soot darkened the trees, the darker moths, those had the advantage. They blended in better, avoided predators. Over time, the population shifted towards those darker moths.
So evolution isn't about this path toward some perfect being. It's about adaptation, adapting to the pressures of the environment, which is always changing.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not even about adaptation. Random events, especially in small populations, can play a surprisingly big role in evolution, and we call that genetic drift.
Genetic drift. Can you unpack that one a little more?
Or think of it like flipping a coin. In small populations, random fluctuations in gene frequencies, and by that I mean the proportion of different gene versions, right? Those can cause big changes over time. Certain traits might become more or less common just by pure chance, not because they offer any advantage or disadvantage.
Huh. So chance plays a role in this evolutionary lottery too.
Absolutely. A good example is the founder effect. Imagine a small group starts a new population somewhere isolated, maybe on an island. They only carry a small bit of the genetic variation from the original population, right? So random chance can lead to certain traits becoming more common in this new, smaller population, even if those traits aren't necessarily helpful for survival.
So the legacy of that small founding group with its limited set of genes can really impact the future of that population.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how evolution is multifaceted, shaped by deterministic forces like natural selection and random events like this genetic drift.
Wow. This is already giving me a much richer understanding of evolution. It's not just this survival of the fittest idea, but this complex interplay of adaptation and chance and this constant reshuffling of genetic information.
Right. And we've barely scratched the surface. Evolution isn't just about changes within a single species. It's also about how different species interact and shape each other's evolutionary paths. We call that coevolution.
Coevolution. That sounds fascinating. How do those interactions between different species shape how they evolve?
Well, imagine an evolutionary arms race. One species evolves a trait, and then another species evolves in response to that. The classic example is this rough-skinned newt and the common garter snake. The newt developed a powerful toxin to protect itself from predators, and in response, the snake evolved resistance to that toxin.
So it's this constant back and forth, each species pushing the other to evolve. But is all coevolution about this kind of conflict? Are there examples of species evolving together in a more cooperative way?
Oh, absolutely. Take the relationship between plants and mycorrhizal fungi. These fungi live in the soil and they help plants absorb nutrients, especially phosphorus and nitrogen.
Mm.
And in return, the plants give the fungi sugars they produce through photosynthesis. It's a win-win situation that developed over millions of years.
It sounds like coevolution adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story.
It definitely does. Shows how species are interconnected, their fates are intertwined.
This has been fascinating. We've gone from that basic definition of evolution to all these forces driving it, from mutations to natural selection, genetic drift, and even this idea of coevolution.
And there's still so much more to explore.
Before we move on, I want to ask you something. We've been talking about the peppered moth, that newt snake arms race, examples from the past. But evolution isn't just a historical thing, is it? It's happening all the time, all around us.
You're exactly right. Evolution is ongoing, and we're actually seeing it happen in real time, especially with how rapidly we're changing the planet.
Can you give us an example of modern-day evolution happening right now?
One striking example is the evolution of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Bacteria reproduce incredibly quickly, so we can actually see these evolutionary changes within our lifetimes. As we overuse antibiotics, we're actually creating this strong selective pressure, favoring bacteria that have those mutations, giving them resistance.
So we're driving the evolution of superbugs through what we're doing.
In a way, yes. It really shows how human activities can have a huge impact on the evolutionary paths of other species. We need to be more aware of the evolutionary consequences of our choices.
That's a sobering thought, but it also highlights just how important it is to understand evolution.
Absolutely. The more we understand about how evolution works, the better equipped we are to deal with all these challenges in a rapidly changing world. And it's not just bacteria, we're seeing these evolutionary changes in animal populations, in plants, even in viruses. Evolution is always at work.
It's mind-blowing to think about how widespread it is. From those tiny bacteria to entire ecosystems, it touches everything.
Exactly. And it's not just about the past or even the present. Evolution's about the future, too. What kinds of adaptations might emerge as, species deal with these environmental changes, natural and human caused?
That makes me wonder about us, about humans. We're living in this time of crazy technological change, cultural change. Could that be affecting how humans are evolving?
It's definitely possible. Evolution usually happens over these long periods, but human activity can speed up certain processes. Think about lactase persistence, for example. It's the ability to digest milk sugar as adults.
Right.
That trait, it's pretty recent in human evolution, probably driven by the rise of dairy farming.
So cultural practices like starting to farm dairy cows
Yeah.
can actually create these pressures that favor certain traits.
Exactly. And in our world today, we're always interacting with technology, exposed to new diets and lifestyles, facing global challenges like climate change. It makes you wonder, how are all these factors shaping human evolution?
It's almost like a reminder. We're not just observing evolution, we're part of it. Our choices, our innovations, how we affect the environment, it all contributes to this ongoing story.
Precisely. And understanding that, our role in this process, that's crucial. It helps us make better decisions, consider those long-term consequences, maybe even steer evolution in a direction that benefits us and the planet.
That's a powerful thought. Understanding evolution isn't just about the past, it's about shaping the future.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, part of this huge web of life that's constantly evolving. And by getting a deeper understanding of this process, we can become more responsible stewards of our planet and our own evolution.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered a lot of ground. From those basic mechanisms of evolution to what it means for the past, present, and future of life on Earth.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you. And remember, this is just the start. Studying evolution is like this journey of endless discovery. The more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought. If evolution is always happening, all around us, even within us, what adaptations are we undergoing right now in this crazy, changing world? It's something to think about as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century.
It really is. It makes us think about where we fit into this grand scheme of life and contemplate the power of evolution to shape our world and ourselves.
It really gets you thinking, what's shaping us right now? Are we evolving to be like more tech savvy, more adaptable to all this constant change? What's going on at that genetic level?
It's a fascinating question to consider. It's hard to say for sure what the exact course of evolution will be, of course,
Right.
but we can look for clues by studying our genes, observing those trends in human health and behavior. For example, some researchers think our immune systems are evolving in response to how hygienic our lives are now
How interesting.
and to these new pathogens we're exposed to. Others suggest that, changes in our diet and lifestyle could be affecting genes related to our metabolism and how susceptible we are to diseases.
So we might be adapting to this increasingly urbanized, tech-driven world in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. And those adaptations might not always be what we expect. Evolution doesn't necessarily mean improvement in the traditional sense, right?
Right.
It's about survival and reproduction given the environment. So, a trait that seems beneficial in one context might actually be harmful in another.
That makes sense. It emphasizes how important it is to understand not just how evolution works, but also the environment where it's happening. I mean, the same forces that drive adaptation can also have some unexpected consequences.
Absolutely. Evolution is complex, often unpredictable, and our understanding of it is always evolving too. The more we learn, the more we realize there's still so much more to learn.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. It's given me a whole new way of thinking about the power of evolution to shape life, not just in the past, but right now, in this moment, and into the future.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the story of evolution is still being written. Every generation adds a new chapter, and it's up to us to understand what role we play in this grand narrative.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into evolution here on Mental Minute. We hope it sparked your curiosity and got you thinking about those forces that are shaping life on Earth.